Donald Trump's federal coup trial is back on. That is because this court, as mentioned, is ruling against defendant Trump today. They're greenlighting the trial sought by special counsel Jack Smith. This ruling sets a historic precedent for holding a former president accountable. We have special coverage for you tonight that we've been working on all day since this broke early on the East Coast today, and we're going to go through it with you. We start with the basics. You don't need to be a lawyer or a constitutional scholar to understand this. The ruling rejects Donald Trump's very far-fetched arguments that his job history as president should mean that he could never be arrested, indicted, or tried for anything related to his time in office. Trump's lawyers had argued that he should basically retain a kind of a permanent immunity from the fact that he used to be president. Well, the court is rejecting that today. And we're going to begin, like I said, with the clarity of this single spare sentence. Quote, "For the purpose of this criminal case, former President Trump has become Citizen Trump." That's it. If you don't want to read the whole thing, and we're going to give you more context, but that's the ruling right there. That term, Citizen Trump, is this high court saying that this individual is subject to prosecution and a trial and possible incarceration like any other citizen. That is the top line. That is the key. That is why this is a devastating loss to a defendant, Donald Trump, who had hoped to either establish some new get-out-of-jail-free card for long-term permanent immunity or to use this to delay the case indefinitely. Here's how the historic news broke today.
That D.C. appeals court that had taken up this issue of presidential immunity, the court has denied Trump's argument.
This is a big win for special counsel Jack Smith and clearly a setback for former President Donald Trump.
The Trump team has already indicated that they intend to appeal this decision to the U.S. Supreme Court.
This is also about timing. We know former President Trump and his legal team, they are trying to do anything they can to delay.
And Trump's legal team has one move left in this case, and they say they're going to try it. They are going to ask the Supreme Court to review today's big ruling. And that could delay any trial of Donald Trump if the Supreme Court takes the case. But the Supreme Court could also simply decline that request, letting this ruling stand. The Supreme Court denying far-fetched Trump legal appeals is not a new thing, even though he has appointed 3 justices to the current court. That's how the court, remember, handled many Trump appeals in the related period after his November 2020 loss. This high court never heard, let alone overturned, the appeals court rulings against Trump's election theories and complaints about his loss. Now, I say that by way of background. The court could also decide that this is a big legal question about a former president, and they could hear this case as a way to review it. Now, today's ruling is legally solid. It was unanimous, 3 judges siding with Jack Smith. And the D.C. Circuit is considered the key court of appeals in the nation with an expertise on government issues. The new ruling discusses how Trump faces the evidence and allegations of waging an unprecedented assault on the structure of our government. And the court discussed the evidence that Donald Trump stands accused of injecting himself into a process in which the president has no role, the counting and certifying of the Electoral College votes, undermining constitutionally established procedures. So, if your argument is, hey, I was just presidenting, and in fact, you're doing something where you have no role because the presidency, as powerful as it is a government role. We've been at this for a long time in this country, so there are limits that have already been established. For example, if a president storms the Capitol and says he wants to vote and insists on voting in Congress, that's not part of the presidential role. That may sound far-fetched, except when you remember that a bunch of the president's supporters did storm the Capitol, and that according to evidence and under oath testimony on January 6th in the hearings, he wanted to go physically storm as well. Now, the court today is finding that those kind of efforts for the president to go far beyond what is even debatable in his powers, and those efforts waged for malicious or criminal intent, doesn't mean you have no limit there. Doesn't mean that there's no way to ever prosecute that after you leave office. That those kind of things can be prosecuted just like, say, murder.
Could a president who ordered SEAL Team 6 to assassinate a political rival who was not impeached, would he be subject to criminal prosecution?
If he were impeached and convicted first. And
so your answer is no.
Your answer is no. That was the most infamous exchange in the oral argument, which was for today's ruling. So if you're trying to keep this all straight and you're saying, hey, Ari, I watch the news, but there's a lot of different Trump cases. There's a lot of different prosecutions. Well, that infamous argument, which made waves well outside of news, by the way, it was on the late night shows, it was in the culture, it was all over the internet. Are we living through this? That moment was from this case, a Trump lawyer promoting the violent, lawless theory of presidential power there. Well, today the news is that this ruling answers that exchange. The court ruling against Trump and noting that his stance would collapse our very system of separated powers by placing the president beyond the reach of all three branches. That is court speak for we don't have a dictatorship. We have separate, co-equal branches of government. And the court notes that the Trump alternative theory would be Congress could not legislate, the executive could not prosecute, and the judiciary could not review. Again, that is the description of a quasi-dictatorship. Now, Jack Smith's win today reinforces accountability, not only for citizen Trump, as the court called him, but for any president who might try to abuse powers against democracy or public safety. The court flatly noting we cannot accept the office of the presidency places its former occupants above the law. Now, that principle is not new. But tonight, because of the extreme and egregious behavior of a single former president, tonight that principle is reaffirmed at a very high level. And if the Supreme Court, as I said, does not take and review this case, this would be the last word on it. Many, many key precedents come from these appeals courts or the D.C. Circuit, not all the way up to the Supreme Court. I told you we would start simple, and we did. I showed you some of the basic sentences from this court that tell you why this is a citizen Trump and not a president or dictator Trump. But I want to end, before I bring in our guests, with one other slightly more nuanced point. There's been a lot of talk about elector fraud and voter fraud, talk about elections and democracy, talk about who is the really bad party stealing them or not. There's been talk about coups and insurrections. This ruling cuts to the heart of accountability in our system in an imperfect but still functioning democracy. And this is the most important part in my legal analysis for you tonight, which I'm about to show you what the judges say. Here's the concept. However imperfect and however frustrating and however slow, the people still have the greatest check on power through their vote in a functioning democracy. Now, if that is stolen by liars or would-be tyrants who, of course, then accuse others of doing the stealing and others of being illegitimate, but if that is stolen, then this nation will not endure as a democracy that is able to check political power with people power. That's why this whole thing matters. It's not because people have other objections to Donald Trump or his style or what he's put us through or how much time and energy he may have sucked out of the body politic away from other things that could have been addressed, legislated, other policies. It's not about that. Everyone knows Donald Trump tried to steal the race after he lost. Whether he did it in a way that is criminal and therefore jailable is still for the courts to decide. Not for you or I or any observer, but for the courts through a mandated system and due process protections and a jury of your peers. But the other key line tonight in this ruling speaks to this clash, this talk of coups and insurrections and voter fraud, which has very sadly and sometimes frustratingly defined our civic life for the past few years. The judges rule they cannot accept the claim that a president has unbounded authority to commit crimes that would neutralize the most fundamental check on executive power, the recognition of election results. And here we are full circle, because those election results, that check on power still works. That's what we're talking about. It was those election results that functioned in 2020. And today the court rules that that check must still operate in the election that we are heading towards later this year, not by delaying accountability or sugarcoating or punting, but rather, no matter what happens in this trial, which is now back on and which could still acquit the defendant or have a mistrial or have many endings that might not be what people who want Donald Trump to be tried are hoping for, but the functioning of the system, holding that trial of a former president alongside this year and this campaign and his effort to run again, that is what the system demands.